I'm here with Andrew Peterson. For more than 20 years now, Andrew has been about the business of quietly changing lives in 4-minute increments. In the city of Nashville, where music is an industry in the same way fast food and generic greeting cards and bumper stickers are industries, Peterson has forged his own path, refusing the artistic compromises that so often come with chasing album sales and radio singles, and creating instead a long line of songs that ache with sorrow, joy, and integrity, and that are, at the end of the day, part of a real, ongoing human conversation. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As you know, Frederick Buechner will soon be turning 90 years old. Is there anything you would like to wish him for this great milestone?
Oh man, I wish I could burst out of a cake at his party. That would be exciting. No, I would say happy Buechner, Mr. Birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. Buechner. I hope that you know, as you look back over many, many years of writing, that your works and your words are going to live on for many, many years. They've shaped and will continue to shape the hearts and the minds of countless readers. I'm really grateful for your care, not just for stories, but for the sentences in those stories, sentences that lodge really deep in readers' hearts and their minds, and ideas that take root and flourish into good and beautiful things. Things that you may not really see or understand before the resurrection. So I hope that you're encouraged on your birthday. I hope that you rest well, knowing that you have stewarded your gifts really well and that the kingdom of God is better for it.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I'm sure Mr. Buechner will greatly appreciate your words and hearing from you. Next, can you tell me how you first learned about his work?
Well, I had heard his name many, many times over the years. Like, you know, as a songwriter, traveling around, the kind of music that I write kind of fell between the cracks of, you know, what the Christian music industry and kind of the mainstream kind of songwriter world. And so it was like I was influenced by Paul Simon and James Taylor and writers like that. But at the same time, I was a Christian. So whenever I sat down and was as honest and as open as possible in my songwriting, I couldn't avoid the fact that what I was ultimately writing about was my faith, you know, about the way that God had kind of ambushed me when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And so it was funny because I was writing music that wasn't the kind of music that would typically get played on Christian radio or be, you know, best-selling stuff in that industry. But at the same time, I couldn't easily go and play in clubs and mainstream things. And so that attracted a certain kind of listener. And, you know, people who were in the same boat that I was in, where we were interested in talking about a lot of the same kinds of things, wrestling with the same ideas. And so in a lot of those conversations with people who liked my music, I kept hearing Buechner come up again and again and again, you know, in the context of C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton, people like that. I kept hearing about this guy. And so finally, just one day decided to pick a random book, and it was The Eyes of the Heart was the first Buechner book that I ever read. And I remember when I read that book, the way my mind, it's hard to explain, but it felt like my mind was kind of crackling. Like the first time I read Annie Dillard, I read Pilgrim and Tinker Creek. And I remember just thinking, I've never read sentences like this before. I didn't know that you could do this with language. And I had the same experience with Frederick Buechner's writing. Like, there were just sentences that kind of danced in a way that I was not used to reading, and so I was hooked. And not only was it like from a kind of a nerdy prose standpoint, just enjoying the language, but it was really cool to read what he was writing about. So it wasn't just my mind that was crackling; it was my heart that was thrilling at the same time, and I don't know, it produced a great deal of comfort in me early on. And I'm the kind of person who, like, if I discover a new songwriter, I go out and I binge and I buy every single thing that person's ever written, and I listen to it constantly. I'm the same way at Mexican restaurants. Like, if I find a plate that I love, then that's what I order for the next 2 years, because I like to just suck all the marrow out of it. And so I did that with Frederick Buechner probably maybe 15 years ago, something like that.
That's really great. That's a great story. What would you say most attracts you to Mr. Buechner's writing?
Well, I would say on the prose level, I was attracted to his ability to craft sentences and paragraphs that were totally unique in my experience as a reader. I keep thinking of G.K. Chesterton. I don't know if anybody out there has read his stuff, but it's the same thing. It's just like you are, like you're undeniably coming into the presence of a person when you read their stuff. Like it's like unmistakably, this is Frederick Buechner that I'm reading. Like you could like give me a paragraph of his work and kind of know or suspect that either it was Frederick Buechner or it was somebody who was greatly influenced by him. So that was really cool to encounter a writer that just had this very unique, beautiful voice. So I think though after that it was the fact that I'm a pastor's kid from the deep South. So I grew up mostly in North Florida, and with my dad as a preacher, kind of the old school, and grew up in a very cultural Christianity, kind of like Flannery O'Connor called it, the Christ haunted South, you know. So I grew up in this with a faith, a genuine faith, but at the same time, it was one that was more kind of up here, you know. It was just like some stuff that I assented to intellectually or even culturally. Like I was just like, yes, this looks like as good a way to live as any. And so I didn't have a hard time being a Christian in that way. But then, you know, as anybody grows up, I remember I was in my mid to late 20s. And that was when you start encountering real grown-up difficulties in life. You know, my marriage hit a really hard couple of years, and that rattled me, and was experiencing real like road weariness with my career, and real pain. Like there was just stuff was hitting me in a way that I was not equipped to handle. And so I remember feeling very alone, and Buechner's writing made me feel less alone. Like when I encountered it, I felt like he was asking questions that I was afraid to ask out loud, and to read books that so it was like I was at a place where I was struggling with things, and he was helping me to articulate what I was struggling with. But then the other side of that was that his writing seemed to me to be not just about doubting, as if that's the end goal, you know. I have a priest friend of mine who calls it faithful doubting. Like he was writing questions and exploring ideas about his own story and about faith in a way that did not end with, isn't it cool to have questions? You know, it ended with, all of life is grace. You know, every moment is, you know, the quote that I'm getting at. I could list like 15 Buechner quotes that I memorized the minute I read them, you know. And so it was like, it gave me a very safe place to express and experience a new growth in my own faith as a Christian. Like it was like there were certain things in me that had to die in order to make room for new things to grow. And he was the one who kind of like shepherded me through that.
That is really cool, and it's quite a story. You mentioned a couple of Mr. Buechner's books. Which of them overall have meant the most to you?
Wow. Well, I would. It's hard to pin them all down. Godric, like the way I've described it before, is when I read Godric, it was like a thunderclap. Like when I first read that book, I had never. And I'd read quite a few of his books, but in this one, he was just flexing his muscles as a writer, you know, and there was just something so entrancing about that book. Like I found myself while I was reading it wanting to read it out loud to myself, so that I could enjoy the sound of the sentences and the words. But there's that one is one that usually the one that I give people, like if they come over to my house and they see my collection of basically all of Buechner's first editions, because I'm a giant nerd. And they say, where should I start? Depending on the person, I will tell them you should read Godric first. But then I kind of go, oh, but wait a minute. It's so much different than all of his other stuff. Maybe you should read Telling the Truth first. So if I had to pick my probably my two favorite books. It's like fiction, it would be Godric, and as far as his essays, I think Telling the Truth is monumental.
Very cool. So you've written many songs and many books. Are there anything in particular that you would say that were inspired by Mr. Buechner's work?
Oh yeah, it's funny. I played a concert at the Buechner Institute at King College last year, and it was fun. It was kind of for a Buechner conference, and so I got to play. And so I was sitting down to choose the set list, and it was almost embarrassing by the end of the night how many of the songs had straight up Buechner rip-offs in them. Like I thought, oh, that'll be fun to play these songs for these people who actually are probably familiar with his work. And after a while, I was almost sweating, just thinking like, wow, almost all of these ideas, especially the songs that I was writing in those years, were ideas or turns of phrase or whatever that were taken from him. So for the ones that come to mind first, there's a song I wrote called "Lay Me Down," which was written after my grandmother's funeral, and it's kind of about my general homelessness as far as knowing where my roots are from. And the last verse of the song says, "I believe in the holy shores of uncreated light. I believe there's power in the blood, and all of the death that ever was. If you set it next to life, I believe it would barely fill a cup." Which is a line that, depending on where I play, actually produces cheers from people. And I don't think it's necessarily just Buechner fans, but when they hear that idea that all the death that ever was set next to life would barely fill a cup, which is from Godric, is such a stirring like tell-off to death that I think people are moved by it. So there's that. I'm trying to remember. There's a song that I wrote called "In the Night My Hope Lives On." That's kind of this Bob Dylan-esque, a song with lots and lots of different verses that all of them have the same refrain. But the opening line to that song is, "I am weary with the pain of Jacob wrestling, in the darkness with the fear, in the darkness with the fear. But he met the morning, wounded with a blessing. So in the night, my hope lives on." And so that idea of referring to God as the fear with a capital F was something that I'd, in all my years of VBS and Bible college or whatever, I'd never really noticed how profound and almost haunting it is that there's that passage in Genesis where it refers to God as the fear. And the fact that in Son of Laughter, Buechner, he uses that the entire time was so kind of like unsettling to me, to think of God that way. And then to think in the context of knowing what we know from the New Testament, that what used to be a God that we were told to fear in almost in a pejorative way becomes this, like Aslan in C.S. Lewis books, this big, powerful beast that we are allowed to climb around on his back, and so that was a big one. And another, as far as my work in general goes, I talk about this at a lot of concerts when I encourage other songwriters or poets or painters or whatever. Like if you ever encounter any kind of writer's block, or staring at the blank page, which is one of the most intimidating things for any kind of writer, if you don't know what to write about, then you listen to your life. You pay attention. You think back to, like, I can't remember where which book it's in, but where Buechner talks about paying attention to the moments in your life when you're crying without knowing why you're crying. All of us have these moments. It's easy. Like when I say that, you can hear the audience kind of go, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And C.S. Lewis in Surprised by Joy, those moments were some of the moments that led him to Christianity, because there were these kind of luminous moments where you felt this stab of joy that felt almost like pain, where you couldn't explain it, but like you're ambushed by a kind of beauty that you can't explain. You get this overwhelming sense that there's more than what we can see with our eyes. And I think that Buechner is really good at that, like digging into the story of your life and looking for those moments is tremendous when it comes to life in general, but especially if you're a writer. And so there is a song called Shine Your Light on Me, that I wrote several years ago in a season where I didn't know what to write about. And I sat down and I thought, I'm just going to try something, and I'm going to choose a memory that that has never left me alone. A story, something that happened to me in high school that I usually tell as a funny story about a time that my car got stuck in the woods before cell phones. And I had snuck out of my house as a teenager and was driving around the dirt roads near my house, and my car got stuck, and I had to walk home miles and miles in the dark woods in Florida, which is really creepy. And I would tell that story to my friends. It's way more involved than I just made it sound. And always feel this nagging sense that that story had something to teach me. And so following Buechner's lead, I decided to start the song with that story. And it ended up being a song about called "Shine Your Light on Me," about when I pulled back and I looked at that story from a bird's eye view. I saw a 16-year-old kid wandering home through the woods, trying to make it back to church in time so that my dad wouldn't notice that I wasn't in Sunday school, because I was terrified of getting in trouble. But if you kind of zoom out and listen to your life, the picture that it paints is a picture of my whole life. Is that I have spent a lot of time wandering in the woods, trying to get home, and finding myself in the light and the beauty and the safety of the gospel and my family, and kind of the open arms of this church that says the lights will be on whenever you get out of the woods. And so just as a kind of a broad example of a principle that I learned from reading Buechner's books that has led me to some of the songs that I'm most proud of.
That is so cool. I knew you were a Buechner fan, but to hear all of those different songs and instances and the insights that you gained out of his work that you were able to apply to your own life was really wonderful to hear.
Thanks.
So more broadly speaking, what influence would you say Mr. Buechner's had on Christianity and the world at large?
Well, I was talking to another friend of mine not long ago about Frederick Buechner and you know, the fact that there was this one certain moment in my life when I discovered his writing. And I think he was one of the ones who helped me to see that I encountered his writing at a certain time in my story where, like I said earlier, a lot of there was a lot of pain. You know, I was very angry with God, and you know, put a hole in my drywall because of some pretty serious pain that my wife and I were experiencing at the time. And it was right in that season that I discovered his writing. And so it was almost like I was in the desert and suddenly I'd found an oasis, and I just drank deep. I was so hungry for somebody to help me make sense of the pain that I was in, the doubt that I was feeling. And so my friend, priest friend kind of said that many of people that he talks to who discover Buechner's writing tend to discover it at a time when they're making a break from typical evangelical Christianity, where they become kind of dissatisfied with what they had grown up with. And I think that's kind of true. I wouldn't necessarily say that I read Buechner and I was like, everything my parents told me was wrong. That's not what I'm getting at. I don't know that that's healthy. But it did coincide with a season in my life where I felt very alone and afraid. And what my suspicion is that there are a lot of Christians out there that feel the same way. A lot of people who've grown up with a very cultural Christianity that is, they're not really sure what to do when the structure that they've been growing up in collapses around them. And so I think that Buechner's kind of unflinching honesty helped me to see that, like, there was a kind of Christianity that I was living inside of. And then when the storm came and flattened that house, Buechner helped me to see that Christianity is not about structures. It's about foundations. It's about things are going to come and destroy the structure if we build it ourselves. But and questions can knock down those walls. Doubts can knock down those walls. But when the dust clears, I kind of found myself realizing that it's about foundation and not structure. I hope that makes sense. So I would say that my suspicion would be, if you could talk to a lot of different people who discovered Buechner or were moved by him, it would be a lot of people who found comfort on the edges of things, like in their culture or their Christianity, their community. Buechner would be the guy that was sitting at a table in the lunchroom that said, you can ask any question you want at this table because Jesus is big enough for all of that. You're welcome to ask those questions here. And I think that will be the lasting impact of his work.
I think that's quite insightful, and I would agree with you that there are many people who have encountered him or gained the most out of his work in trying times. So I know this next question is a little bit difficult, but if you were to sum up Fred or his writings in a few words, what would you say?
That is a difficult question. So I'm actually going to read what I wrote so that I wrote down an answer to this. And so maybe this will get at it. It's only 9 pages long. Just kidding. I wrote, Frederick Buechner, when he is writing in the tension of his own unflinching honesty, coupled with a love for Christ and the church, is one of the finest authors of our time. The stories and the essays he's written in that tension have a great power to comfort and to lead us to moments of profound wonder and gratitude for the grace that holds all things together. So to sum that up even more so, I would say that, like, if I had one, I wouldn't say it was a gripe. I'm not gonna. That's not what this is for. I would just say that, like, the moment where you've got the sail at the perfect angle with the rudder and the wind, like when he really soars, it's when Frederick is not just questioning. It's when he's questioning in the context of, whatever happened to me, my encounter with Christ was real. Whatever happened to me was real, and I can't totally make sense of it. And I've got all of these questions, but when all that is gone, there's this great, beautiful church and gospel that undergirds all of this stuff. And so when I read his books and I sense that beautiful tension, which to me is a very Chestertonian thing. Like G.K. Chesterton's, was always writing about that God could be, what other religion has a God who is both completely holy and completely gracious, like all of those things in tension together make for this very, very compelling, paradoxical truth that is really attractive and can't really, no other religion can really claim that their God is all powerful, but he also knows what it's like to be lonely. And so when Buechner is coming at his stories and his writing from that angle, I feel like there's this just bright power in his words. So I'm just so grateful that there are people out there reminding people that his books are around and that who he is very special.